Morning, church. Today we return again to the pool at Bethesda. As you all know, my role here is that I have the fortunate joy of working in high school ministry. Our little Sabbath School group, we call it Regen. One thing that we like to do there is we like to recognize people when they make their first steps in ministry. We call it their debuts. So today in Sabbath School, we had 3 people singing for the first time. We recognized their debut. Today we had Sadie Baker taking a children's story for the first time, and she absolutely killed it. And also today, we are so fortunate to have Nichole making her preaching debut. Give her a round of applause. It's just a wonderful moment when people get to experience ministry in any form that they have been gifted. Last week, we had the fortunate joy of hearing from the years of experience that Dr. Hart has as he looked at what it means to be an individual who follows the message and the methods of Jesus as we heal and help people. And so as I constructed this series, I wanted to hear from his years of experience and then also somebody just slightly younger than him. So we've gone with Nichole. She's in her 3rd year down there at Southern. Young people, we consume a lot of information online. We do. Nichole consumes a lot of information online, and ironically, her father produces a lot of information online as well. She is far too humble to mention. But in case you're not aware, so Dr. Roger Seheult, he has been communicating our health message across some platforms on YouTube. Very quickly, is anybody aware of the Huberman Lab podcast or the Diary of a CEO? Yeah. Nichole's father, Roger, has been taking our message to those platforms and has received millions upon millions of views. Nichole also believes in this. And Nichole has a unique experience as well, as she has come to believe and to live and to wish to share this message of health and wholeness and healing. So with all of that said, round of applause again. Nichole, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Good morning and happy Sabbath, church family. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be up here and given the opportunity to speak to a congregation that I grew up attending church with. However, I am extremely honored that Pastor Chris asked me to do this, and I believe that God has put a message upon my heart today that I want to share with all of you guys. This is not my first time up here on stage. In fact, for about the past 10 years, I have been part of the handbell choir here at this church. And even though I've been at college recently for the past 2 years, my younger siblings are still in the choir today. And we have a tradition at the end of every single school year where we go to a different amusement park. And this past summer, the amusement park we chose to go to was Six Flags Magic Mountain. And since my siblings were in it, I was invited to come along as a designated driver and drive us all down to Six Flags for the day. Now, my parents often refer to Six Flags Magic Mountain just as Magic Mountain, so that's the thought I had in my head when I typed in Magic Mountain to Google Maps. And before we went, I have to preface this story by saying that in my family, I have the reputation of not being the most street smart person. In fact, if you ask my family or if you ask some of my close friends, they would tell you that I'm probably the least street smart person that they've ever met. So my brother, knowing this, asked me before we left, he was like, Nichole, are you sure you can get us to Six Flags Magic Mountain? And I was like, King, I got you. I typed in Magic Mountain into Google Maps, I have it in the car, I can follow instructions, we're gonna be fine. And he was like, okay, so off we went, and at first everything was fine. We were on 4-lane freeway, traffic was flowing, everything was great. But then Google told me to get off the 4-lane freeway onto this 2-lane highway. And I thought that was a little odd. I was like, okay, maybe there's traffic, or maybe There's an accident. This is a faster route. That's fine. And I was going to ask my brother next to me, but of course he's sleeping. So I'm like, okay, well, it's fine. I can figure this out on myself. So I thought I could do that until that 2-lane highway turned into a 1-lane road. And now I was kind of stressing a little bit. I was like, maybe we're going the back way. Maybe there's another accident. I mean, things happen. Like, I get it. And my brother was still sleeping, so I didn't bother to wake him. But then that 1-lane road suddenly crossed some railroad tracks, and I found myself at the base of this gravel road with all of these abandoned trailers and like this huge no trespassing sign. And it was at this moment I'm like, oh, this is not good. My brother is not gonna like this. And right when I'm figuring that out, he wakes up next to me and he takes one look around. He's like, Nichole, where are we? Turns out in Southern California, there is a real physical mountain called Magic Mountain. And let me tell you guys, there is nothing magical about it. Because while the rest of our group was at Six Flags Magic Mountain, I was over here leading my whole sibling, all my family, into the wilderness. And the only commandment I will say that I got when I left that mountain was from my brother, who told me, "Thou shalt never, ever again navigate while I am in the car," because you obviously can't. And I tell you that story because it's really funny, but I also noticed when I was studying John chapter 5 that there were a lot of parallels between my little adventure and what the man at the pool of Bethesda was going through. Because I was following all the directions that were given to me. I was following Google Maps, I was making all the right turns, and yet I still did not end up at my intended destination. And the man at the pool of Bethesda in John chapter 5 is in the same situation. He is following all the instructions given to him. He's making sure to wait by the waters, watching when they stir, trying to jump in, and yet he is also never reaching his intended destination, which is healing. The scene John paints for us in chapter 5 of his gospel is not a pretty one. In verse 2 it begins, "Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. Can you imagine the amount of suffering that was congregated in that one area? People who were hurting, people who needed to feel the hands of Jesus and the presence of Jesus. And the truth is that in today's day and age, even though the setting might be different, the needs are still the same. There are people in our world today who need to feel the presence of Jesus just as much as the people who are at the pool of Bethesda. Last week, Dr. Hart mentioned who Jesus would heal if he came onto this earth today. And this morning, I want to share with you guys instead on how Jesus healed while he was here during his ministry on earth. Because the truth is, as Adventists, we are called to be the hands and feet of Christ in our hurting world. And there is no better way to do that than to follow the example that Christ led for us while he was here on earth. So we're today going to study this story in John chapter 5 and not focus on the surface level miracle that occurred, but instead focus on the patterns of healing that Jesus demonstrated while he was here on earth. While I was studying this story, the first thing that really stood out to me was Jesus' presence. In Desire of Ages, on page 201, Ellen G. White writes this. She says, "But the Savior saw one case of supreme wretchedness. It was that of a man who had been a helpless cripple for 38 years. His disease was a great degree the result of his own sin, and was looked upon as judgment from God. Alone and friendless, feeling that he was shut out from God's mercy, the sufferer had passed long years of misery. For 38 years, that man sat there by himself, unable to move. And yet Jesus stopped for him. Jesus walked into a place that was full of hurting people. Jesus singled out the man who had been there for 38 years. And Jesus walked into that man's story and rewrote it completely. The bottom line is that Jesus did not avoid suffering. He walked right into it. And as his followers, we are called to do the same. We are called to enter into people's pain and not just pass them by. We are called to see people not just as patients or projects, but as persons who are deeply loved by God. Because the truth is, when we go into those places in our hurting world of darkness, where suffering and hurting exist, that is when the love and presence of Jesus becomes real to the people who are there. And they are the ones who need to experience it the most. Jesus' example throughout his ministry here on earth shows and tells us the same thing. Jesus did not just interact with the higher class people of society. What did Jesus do? He interacted with the lepers. He interacted with the Samaritans. He interacted with the women. Jesus made sure that his presence was felt by everyone. He made sure and was intentional that his ministry interacted with people that we would consider the rejects or outcasts of society. And as his followers, we are called to do the same in our hurting world today. We are called to make sure that our presence, that Christ's presence through us, is felt by every single person on this earth. And so the first thing that really stood out to me was Jesus' presence. The second thing that I took notice of was how Jesus healed with wholeness. At Loma University, we are no stranger to the motto, to make man whole. But what does that really mean in reality? And how did Jesus demonstrate that through his ministry here on earth? In Matthew chapter 4, verse 23, it says that Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. Notice how intentional that is. Jesus taught, he preached, and he healed. And it was through these three components that Jesus not only met the initial physical needs of the people he interacted with, but he focused on meeting their spiritual needs as well and their mental needs. In other words, Jesus focused on the whole person. As Adventists, we are blessed with an incredible health message from Ellen G. White, in which she shares with us how we can also focus on the whole person. As Pastor Chris mentioned, my dad, Dr. Roger Seheult, is very passionate about sharing this Adventist health message with others in our world. And one of the things I always hear him saying when he's sharing the message with someone is he always tells them about this acronym called New Start, which was created at Weimar University. And what New Start is it combines all the aspects of our health message kind of into a nutshell, into this 8-letter acronym that's really easy to remember and can help guide us when we're trying to live our lives in a whole and balanced way. This is what each letter in the acronym stands for. The N stands for nutrition, which can mean eating whole and plant-based foods that can help nourish our body. The E stands for exercise, which is pretty self-explanatory, just staying active and making sure that we strengthen the body that Christ gave us. W stands for water, and this can include water both internally as well as the use of water externally, such as through practices as hydrotherapy or using a sauna. The S stands for sunlight, and this is a topic that my dad is really passionate about. I won't talk about it that much, but what I will say is that sunlight has a plethora of benefits, and those benefits are not just physical, but they're also mental. T stands for temperance, which involves practicing moderation in all things. A stands for air. R stands for rest, including not only a nightly rest, but also a weekly rest, which we as Adventists call the Sabbath. And T stands for trust in God, making sure that we rely on him for guidance, peace, and ultimate well-being. This acronym of New Start did not exist during Jesus' day. However, the theme behind it is the exact same, focusing on the whole person. While Jesus was here on earth, he made sure that everyone he interacted with, he didn't just meet their immediate physical needs, but instead he made sure that he cared for the whole component of them. And through the Adventist health message that we are given, it also instructs us on how we can care for our whole selves, but also instruct others on how to care for their whole selves as well. And so the first two things I noticed was presence and wholeness. The third thing that struck me when I was reading this story was how Jesus always finished with instruction. In the story with the man at the pool, he, of course, healed him, but later on in verse 14, he later told the man to go and sin no more. This is a theme that we find throughout all the Gospels in Jesus' ministry. For instance, if you think of the story of the woman who was caught in the act of adultery, Jesus first saved her life, but then he told her to go and sin no more. Jesus always paired healing with instruction. He always made sure to guide the individuals who he came in contact with on how to live a closer life with Christ. Ellen G. White tells us in Ministry of Healing on page 147 that every gospel worker should feel that giving instruction in the principles of healthful living is a part of his appointed work. In other words, the health ministry is evangelism. It is our duty and our goal as followers of Christ to not only make sure our presence is known and that people feel the love of Jesus. It's not only to care for the whole person, but it is also to instruct them in the way that they should go, in the way that they should live, in the way that they can become closer followers of Christ and walk with him in newness of light. One of the reasons why I am very interested in knowing how Jesus healed is because I myself am interested in pursuing a career in medicine. As Pastor Chris mentioned, I am a third-year student at Southern Adventist University, and one of the opportunities I had during my last semester there was being a volunteer in the pediatric intensive care unit at a local hospital. And being in that situation and being in that environment taught me a lot. But what it also taught me was the importance of life. There was one particular case, one particular shift that really stuck with me, and that was because there was a young 7-year-old boy who was actively dying of cancer. And as the volunteer, I was asked to silence the monitors. And what that meant was because this young boy, because the saturations were in levels that would normally trigger alarms, to alert the medical personnel, because he was constantly there, the alarms on his monitors were just going off. And it was creating a really stressful environment, not only for the medical personnel, but also for the other patients, as well as for the family that was there by the bedside. So I was asked as a volunteer to just make sure that whenever the alarms came on, just to silence them immediately. And so I sat there for the next hour and a half to 2 hours, and I watched as the life slowly slipped away from this little boy. I watched as his blood pressure dropped. I watched as his breathing became more shallow. And then I watched as his heart beat for the last time and he flatlined. And witnessing that broke a part of me that I previously didn't even know existed. I had never experienced death before in my life, and I certainly had never experienced death in that proximity and in that environment. And it really had a deep impact on me. I remember I was driving home from that shift, and I called my parents, and I was like, I don't know if I can go into medicine. I don't know if I can do this as a career, because this one patient dying has had such a huge impact on me. I mean, how can I dedicate my entire life and surround myself in this environment for the next 40 to 50 years? Like, am I strong enough to do this? And my parents were very supportive, and they said, Nichole, we completely see where you're coming from. However, we don't want you to close the door to medicine completely. We want you to keep an open mind and maybe try a different department, try a different area of medicine, because there's so many opportunities in it. I wouldn't want this one particular instance to shut the door to that completely. And I agreed with them. I saw the point that they were making and the place they were coming from. So I decided to then go and shadow a physician in the children's emergency room at that same hospital. And I was paired with this amazing chief resident. She was very knowledgeable. She was super kind. She would answer all of my questions, and she explained things to me in a really clear and concise way. But what struck me most about her wasn't her technique. What struck me most about her was the way that she cared for her patients. As we would go around the unit and visit the different patient rooms, there was one case that really struck me. There was a young baby that was having trouble breathing, and the baby needed to be intubated. And the mother was extremely distraught and extremely stressed, and basically at her wit's end. And I watched as the resident walked into that room, and she went immediately to the mother, and she knelt on the floor next to the mother and took her hands in her own and reassured her and explained to her what was going on, took the time to answer her questions, and just explain the situation to her. And watching that, in that moment, I realized that I was seeing Jesus in her. It wasn't just in the way that she healed, but it was in the way that she comforted. It wasn't in the way that she treated not only the staff, but also the patients and family, but it was also in the way that she served them. I saw a glimpse of what it was like to be the hands and feet of Christ. And it was in that moment that I realized that that's what I want my life to be doing. That's what I want my life to be about. I realized that medicine is not simply just fixing bodies, but it's also pointing people towards the healer. I realized that it's not just helping people live, but it's helping them see Jesus in the way that I live. It is no secret that our world is full of immense pain and suffering. However, for some of us today, we cannot even begin to fathom the idea of going forward as Christ in our world because we ourselves are broken. We ourselves need to receive the healing power of Christ. And the truth is, by focusing only on Jesus in this story, it only paints half the picture, because there's another character, the crippled man, the one who waited all alone at the pool, unable to stand on his own, waiting for Jesus. And I can't help but ask, how many of us today are that way spiritually? How many of us have been spiritually paralyzed for the past 10, 20, or 38 years? How many of us have been unable to walk on our own? The truth is that in that story, a lot of us aren't Jesus. We are that crippled man. But the good news is that Jesus is still walking by. One of my mom's favorite sayings to my siblings and I is that the first step to fixing a problem is simply acknowledging that it exists. And that's exactly where this story hits home. Paul tells us in Ephesians 2, verse 1, that because of sin, we are spiritually paralyzed. There is literally nothing we can do on our own to combat this. Maybe we've been like the man. Maybe we've tried to fix it. We've tried to jump into the pool. We've tried to fix it ourselves. But ultimately, we've always come up short. But I have good news for you. Because the first step to being able to fix our spiritual paralysis is simply acknowledging that we are helpless. Is simply acknowledging our helplessness. And then the second step is just to wait for Christ to approach us. The man at the pool didn't try to crawl to Christ. The man at the pool didn't try to prove himself to Christ. Instead, all he did was sit there and allow Christ to approach him. And that is the beauty of the gospel, because Jesus will come to us exactly where we are. Once Jesus approached the man, he asked him a question. In verse 6, he says, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Notice how the man here is focused on all the actions that he needs to take in order to reach healing. He's saying, "Oh, I can't get into the water. I am always being blocked by other people." Imagine the irony. This man has the true source of living water standing right in front of him, and yet his eyes are focused on the pool. How many of us today are also trying to fix our own spiritual paralysis? We're trying to maybe have more devotional time, trying to read our Bible more, when in reality, we should be trying to fix our eyes on Christ. Continuing on in verse 8, then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. This man's healing, though, didn't begin when he felt the power return to his legs. This man's healing began the moment he decided to put his complete faith and trust in God and in the words that Christ said. The same words that said thousands of years ago, "Let there be light," and there was light, told this man to pick up his mat and walk. And the willingness to obey and the fact that this man put his faith in the words of Christ allowed him to be healed. He decided to put his faith in the words of Christ. And the important thing to know is that the words of Christ have power. Victory often comes after we decide to put our trust and put our faith in Christ. And one of our guys that helped found the Seventh-day Adventist Church, A.T. Jones, wrote a whole book about lessons on faith. And in it, he gave us this definition. He said, "Faith is the expectation of the Word of God itself to do what the Word says, and depending upon that Word itself to do what the Word says." In other words, faith is putting our complete trust in the divine Word of God. It is believing that everything that is written in here will come true and will come to pass. Faith is such an integral part of the Christian experience that God made sure in his divine word that we would find examples of it. Rather than making all of the different stories of faith scattered throughout the Bible, God ensured that all of those stories would be congregated not only into one book in the Bible, but into one chapter in the Bible. And today as Christians, we know that place as Hebrews chapter 11. The point is that Jesus is asking us to put our complete faith in him in order to allow him to walk with us, bring us closer to him, and help us develop a closer relationship with him. The main point I want you to take away from my message today is this. John chapter 5 gives us two calls. The first call is to go as Christ into our hurting world. It is to light up the dark places with our presence and make sure that everyone feels the love of Jesus. It is also to make sure that we heal with wholeness and make sure that we treat not only the physical needs, but the mental and spiritual needs of those around us. And finally, it is to make sure that we always end with instruction. We not only heal people, but we also give them instruction to lead them closer to Christ. The second point from John chapter 5 is to come as the crippled to Christ. It is to acknowledge that we are helpless without him. It is to then wait and sit and allow Jesus to approach us. And then once he does, it is to put our faith and our complete trust in him. So for those of you today who are already serving, I encourage you to keep going. There are people out there who desperately need to feel the love and presence of Jesus in our world. And for those of us today who are spiritually paralyzed, whether that be from fear, from doubt, or from sin, Jesus approaches you and he bends down to you just like he bent down to the man at the pool of Bethesda. And he asks with love and compassion and an outstretched hand, "Will you be made whole?"